This is a slide presentation about the interaction between microorganisms and man. A lot of people think of microorganisms as germs and there's something to be scared of and they're an evil thing that's trying to kill us. And I'm just very generally looking at this. Microorganisms, are they our friend or are they our foe? Microorganisms have a lot of different roles. They play roles in agricultural, industry, medicine, food, and environmental microbiology. Very briefly looking at some of these in agriculture, they can be used oftentimes for pest management. There are some bacteria that are used as a biological means of controlling pests such as fungi, insects, and therefore if the farmer can use these instead of chemicals, that's a good thing. However, there are a lot of microorganisms that can also be pathogens, as we know. Some of these microorganisms cause problems in pre-harvest. So as the farmer is trying to grow, it may cause root rot, it may cause stem rot. So he's never even able to get his product. Sometimes the farmer is able to grow his product, he harvests it, but then there's issues in post-harvest. Maybe fungi attack it and start to cause rotting of, say, the strawberries before it can get to the consumer. And so in this slideshow, this is what I plan on doing, going through. You've got some good aspects and then some bad aspects. In industrial field of microbiology, we use microorganisms for things such as wastewater treatment, manufacturing. They're used for producing a lot of things such as enzymes, chemicals. They're used for producing medical things such as human insulin. And so we have learned how to use the microorganisms to produce some product that then we want to, as consumers, use. From a medical standpoint, we all know that there are a lot of microorganisms that are pathogens. Overall, if you look at the numbers, only about 5% of them are pathogens. However, those 5% that are pathogens, some of them cause minor diseases, but we also know that some of them can cause very devastating diseases. Some microorganisms, however, are beneficial ones. We have E. coli in our large intestines that's producing vitamin K that we need to have. And then you have some microorganisms that we certainly need because of their antibiotic production that is used, obviously, to help treat the diseases caused by the pathogens. For food microbiology, we use microorganisms to produce things such as bread, such as alcoholic beverages, such as cheese. We use them also for additives, for flavoring. If you were to look at the label on a lot of the things you eat and some of the flavors that are added, where do those come from? Some of the preservatives that are added, where do those come from? Usually you have microorganisms that are producing those in an industrial setting so that you can add that flavor, add that enzyme, etc. From an environmental standpoint, they certainly are necessary for nutrient cycling of carbon, nitrogen, sulfur, etc. We use them for bioremediation, cleaning up contaminated, typically soil sites, but we've also used them when we have had oil spills. The microorganisms have been used to help clean up with the Exxon Valdez spill that occurred in Alaska. They did spray microorganisms along the beach line on the rocks. That was very beneficial in helping to clean up the spill. In environmental aspects also, microorganisms often exist in a symbiotic relationship. Examples of these would be your lichens, where you have the fungi and algae growing in a symbiotic relationship, and then your mycorrhizal fungi, roots, the fungi associated with the plant roots. This is an example of a couple of herbicides, atrazine and 2,4-D, that have been used frequently. The problem is it can accumulate in the soil and then have problems breaking it down. So I was involved with the study of looking at microorganisms that were capable of breaking both of these compounds down. So from a bioremediation standpoint. This is what the structure of lignin is, the second most abundant carbon compound on Earth. The most abundant is cellulose. When I was in graduate school, I worked in a lab that did a lot of research with lignin. So I actually used the lignin as a screening method for looking at different fungi to see if they could break it down. My thought was if they could break this down, then that 2,4-D and atrazine you saw in the previous slide would be a piece of cake. And if something was able to break the lignin down, then we could see if those particular species then would make good bioremediation agents for other compounds. From ecology, there's always been kind of a question of what came first. Is it the plant or is it the fungus? Because if 80% of plants are dependent on the fungus, they are in a symbiotic relationship. Which one came first? So there are three examples that I'm going to present here that I know individuals personally who have been involved in these studies to try to answer this question. The three different case studies, if you will, are Cascade Glaciers up in Washington State, Mount St. Helens, and then St. Mary's Baldy in Oregon. In the Cascade Mountains, there is an area where there are some glaciers, and from these pictures you can see over time that the glaciers are receding. As compared to the first picture from 1928 versus 2000, that the glacier definitely has been receding over time. There's a group of scientists who go up every summer to this area and they collect samples of the newly exposed terrain as the glacier is receding from the previous year. The exposed area, they collect samples and they have been trying to test to see, okay, number one, what's in that soil that's there? Is there any sign of living organisms? If so, what is it? And then because they're going up every year, they monitor how long does it take for things to appear, and once again, what comes. Mount St. Helens. Mount St. Helens erupted in 1980. Massive, as you can see here, massive eruption. This is what happened and what it looked like as it is erupting. This is what Mount St. Helens looks like tonight. It literally blew the top portion of the mountain away. It was a devastating disaster in that there were many lives that were lost, even though there had been warnings given. There was a mud flow that was associated with it. I did have the opportunity to fly over Mount St. Helens about 3 years after it blew. And it looked like just all the trees were like matchsticks. There was nothing growing. It appeared from the air around. It literally looked like a kid that had just put a whole bunch of, like a deck of cards up, and all the trees were the cards that had just been blown down. Once again, there's been a group of scientists who have been going in every year trying to monitor from this quote-unquote dead zone around the mountain where everything was destroyed, in monitoring, once again, from an ecology standpoint, what comes in first. This made for, as huge as the disaster was, the good side of it is it made for an example for ecologists to be able to study this question that's always kind of been concerning. Well, when you have a huge disturbance like this, what comes in first? Will it be the animals? Well, they need to have something to eat. And at some point, if you look at food webs, there's going to be plants. Well, the plants, are they going to be there? What is the overall nutritional quality of the soil? That's often determined by the microorganisms and the worms and the protozoans. how do they get there? And so it's knowing each of the players are dependent on one another, then who gets there first? So as I said, this has been studied ever since the eruption occurred. And then there's an area uh, outside of Corvallis, Oregon, in the coastal range. It's known as Mary's Peak, has nice forested area. But up on the top, as far as the records go, there is this large meadow. It has always been this meadow. Why aren't the trees here? All of these studies have something in common, and that is found from the research, the studies, is that it appears that the microorganisms have to be there first for you to start having plant growth. The way the glaciers are receding in the Cascades, it's the mycorrhizal fungi that will appear first. Mount St. Helens, it was the microorganisms that started to appear first. Once they get established, then you start to get the plants and then the animals. In this area of Mary's Peak, when they have done studies in this open meadow area, one thing they have found is that there are no mycorrhizal fungi. And if you notice, well, there are grasses there. Grasses are one of the few plants that do not require mycorrhizal fungi. The trees do. And so you don't see trees typically in this area of this meadow because there's no mycorrhizal fungi. You'll notice that there's a few little outcroppings of where there are a few trees. When they've tested the soil right under those trees, yes, there are mycorrhizal fungi there. So once again, the question kind of remains, what comes first? The plants, the animals, or the microorganisms? And it appears as though from these studies, at least in these areas, it appears that it is the microorganisms that have come first. So back to the original question, are microorganisms our friends or are they our foes? It depends on the situation. You need to have respect for them because, yes, a lot of them are our foes. They are pathogens, can cause very serious diseases. However, the majority of them are not pathogenic. Majority of them are benefiting us in some aspect. And you can look at it. What is the economic impact of microorganisms? Think of all, from an industrial standpoint, of all the products that they make that we use. You cannot go a single day without having some interaction with microorganisms. If you ate a piece of toast for breakfast, where did that bread come from? You can't have bread without yeast. Well, guess what? Yeast is a microorganism. So my point is, yes, you respect them. Some of them can be very dangerous, cause very serious disease, but don't be scared of them. There's a difference between having a respect and being scared of them. The majority of microorganisms are good, they're a benefit, or they're not going to, positive or negatively affect you either way. So don't be scared of what you can't see.